Senate Bill 1341, a bill relating to holding handheld personal communication devices while driving a motor vehicle.
Senator from King George, Senator Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move the bill pass. And speaking to that,
Thanks, Senator. You have the floor.
Mr. President, this is what's being affectionately referred to as the hands-free bill. And, Mr. President, I will tell you that I have resisted this year after year, really out of individual freedom. But it's become apparent to me that those other folks who are so engrossed in their phones and completely oblivious to the world around them are now imposing on others individual freedoms. And so what this bill does, very simply, if you look at it, it says it's unlawful for any person while driving a motor vehicle on the highways in the Commonwealth to hold a handheld personal communications device. And I know that's sort of a different way to phrase this, but if you think about it, if we were to say operate a phone while operating a motor vehicle or something like that, the definition of operating is very, very broad. Think of it in terms of a DUI statute. We had a discussion last year, and this Senate passed a bill because of people getting convicted of DUI who were sitting in their own driveways with the engine running, listening to the radio, drinking a beer. That's the same thing you're trying to avoid here with using operating in this statute. I've worked with the House. We have come up with this language. We think it's really good language. And we're hoping that when they've resisted amendments, I hope to resist amendments here to it as well, so that we can actually get a hands-free law that law enforcement can enforce. And I hope it's going to save lives in Virginia. It has just become such an incredible distraction that the time for this has come. And I hope you all will support it. I'll also tell you it does have a delayed enactment clause to January 2020, and there's a significant amount of public education on this issue because we don't want to catch people off guard. We want to give them time to learn what the new law is, to understand that now you either have to put your phone down on the console if you want to use your GPS or use hands-free technology, or you can get one of these little, I don't know what you call it, but it's one of these little plastic things, and you put it on your dashboard and it'll hold your phone there. But if we didn't say you can't hold it, then you wouldn't be able to use your GPS. You wouldn't be able to use hands-free technology because technically, if that phone was on for hands-free technology or GPS, you could be operating it. So I think folks will look at this language and go, wow, that's strange. I don't understand why you do it that way. But that's why, and then I want you to know that. It's good language, it'll work, it's enforceable, and it's time for it. Please support the bill.
Thanks, Senator. For what purpose, Senator from Rockingham, Senator Sen Shane Rise.
Mr. President, I rise to speak to the bill.
Senator, has the floor.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, I support what the senator from Westmoreland is trying to do. As a matter of fact, last year we had a bill that came through both chambers that I thought really did a pretty good job of addressing distracted driving. And for a variety of reasons, we were unable to come to an agreement between the two chambers and the governor's mansion. Really, it wasn't the two chambers that couldn't come to an agreement. It was our inability to come to an agreement with respect to whether it was going to be changed in the post-session process. If we had that agreement, we would have passed that bill. We would have had it signed into law. I think that there are appropriate ways to do this, but take a look at this bill. It highlights some of the challenges with this. If I'm driving down the road holding a cup of coffee, I'm doing nothing wrong. But if I'm driving down the road and take my phone out of my pocket, even just to put it down, I violated the law. If I have an older car and just answer the phone and am talking on the phone like this because it's a speakerphone, I'm in violation of the law. If I'm smoking a cigarette, I'm not in a violation of the law. if I am eating a hamburger with both hands. I'm not in violation of the law. But if I take my phone and simply hold it, that's a violation of law. And remember, I mean, we used to be sensitive to the notion of when the police have probable cause to pull somebody over. I don't know whether anybody has any sensitivity to that anymore. I do. And it's not very hard for a law enforcement official who wants a reason to pull somebody over to say, I thought I saw him holding a phone. That gives them grounds to pull you over. Whether you just look funny, they don't like the way you look, they don't like the car that you're driving, they want some pretext to pull you over, that gives it to them. The fact that this has a delayed enactment clause doesn't cure the problem. I mean, we passed this bill, it's enacted. It just isn't enforced until a little bit later. If we were to put a reenactment clause on it, or actually come back and amend this and put it in the form that passed last year, I think we'd have a workable bill. But unfortunately, this was taken up while I was not in courts committee. I wish I'd been there, because I would have had some ideas and thoughts and suggestions, and actually did. But I was dealing with the issue of other hazards on Interstate 81 at the time. But this is well-intentioned. I commend the efforts of those who are advancing this. I supported last year's approach. I could be convinced to support that again, but this is just not the right way to do it. I would ask you to vote no.
Thank the senator. For what purpose, Senator from Spotsylvania, Senator Reeves Rise.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rise to speak to the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen of the body, I would just tell you I'm going to put a human face to this a little bit and talk about a little bit about how easy it is to pull over a car. There's certain things in the code section as a former police officer, objects dangling from a mirror. You got one of those Christmas tree type fragrance things on your mirror, we can pull you over for that. So, but here's the real problem. The texting law that we have in place is not enforceable. And I brought this up as a police officer, and before we were talking about this on the floor and how we're going to be able to, we're putting police officers in a precarious position because we can't tell if they're texting or they're talking or anything else. And I happened to be in court in Orange County one day and watched a docket go through, and there were 3 people charged with driving while texting, and all 3 of those people got off because there was no way to prove that unless it was a admission of guilt. And so I want to put the human face on this. In August 27, 2013, a dear friend of mine, Sheriff Steve Dempsey, lost his daughter and 2 grandchildren because somebody was texting on the highway. And he's been down here every year since trying to get something passed. And I think while it's not perfect, I commend the senator from King George for his work on this. I understand the arguments from the chairman of courts. He's a doggone good trial attorney, and I'm sure there'll be opportunities to take this case up. But I think we need to do something, because people are dying each and every day because they're out there and they're distracted. I don't see them distracted from smoking a cigarette or even drinking something. It's that phone that keeps ticking off in their head, and they feel like they have to answer it right away. So I would hope we would pass the bill.
Thank the senator. For what purpose is the senior senator from Virginia Beach, Senator Wagner Rise?
Very briefly, Mr. President, speaking to the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, you know, we hear a lot up here, this bill will really save lives, this bill will really save lives. Mr. President, I'm convinced this bill will really save lives. There isn't a single one of us that had been here that hadn't been going down the fast lane, and all of a sudden, why is somebody doing 40 miles an hour in the fast lane? And when you finally get around them or see it, it's their texting. Or you've been in one of the lanes, and all of a sudden the car drifts over and drifts back and drifts off the road and drifts back, and what do you see? They're texting. They're on their cell phone. They're not paying attention. Now, state after state after state has passed this law. I don't see the sky falling down. I don't see all of a sudden all the horror stories that people would tell you going on. This bill actually saves lives. I'm convinced of that. And not only that, but think about if you got kids, grandkids. I don't want them texting. I don't want them running cars into things. And I don't want other people running into my kids or grandkids because they're not, or myself as I go down the road. You can smoke a cigarette and drive the car. I know. I did that for a long time. You're not distracted. You're watching the highway. When you start reading a text, when you start feeling the urge to have to reply, you're not looking at the highway at all. And it's so obvious when you see cars drift all over the road. You don't see that if somebody's having a Diet Coke. You don't see that if somebody's having a cigarette, but you do see it every time with somebody with a cell phone in their hand. So I hope you pass this bill.
Thank you, Senator. For what purpose does the senator from King George, Senator Stewart, rise?
Mr. President, if nobody else wishes to speak.
Do any other senators wish to speak on this bill? Seeing none, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the gentleman from Rockingham, our esteemed chairman of the Courts of Justice Committee, brings up a really good point. And it's something that I'm particularly sensitive to, and defending people for some 30 years, I'm very sensitive to person's civil rights. And someone being profiled, in my opinion, is intolerable. And so if you look on line 61, it talked about pretextual stops, profiling, but it's an invasion of a person's civil rights. That the chairman of the Senate and House Committees for Courts of Justice shall annually request from the Office of the Executive Secretary to report all of the citations issued pursuant to this provisions of this Act, and to the extent available, the relevant demographic characteristics of those persons issued a citation. That language is intentional, and that language is intended to try to stop pretextual stops or profiling. I think the best we could possibly do it. The gentleman from Spotsylvania is exactly right. That is a hard thing to do if somebody wants to do it, but I think we've come up with about as good a language as anybody could possibly do to protect from that. So I hope you all will support this bill.
Thank the senator. Question is, shall Senate Bill 1341 pass? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 34, noes 6.
Ayes 34, no 6. Senate Bill 1341 passes.